welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for not introducing me as your sweet wife this time. I'm happy to be here.
You're so sweet. Mm-hmm. And also with us is one of the counselors that we're bringing on, and make sure we say associate counselor, correct?
Correct.
Right, we can't say official counselor, but super excited to have you, Hayley. Hayley Hengst, welcome to our unbelievable, awesome show.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here.
So talk to us about what it is exactly you do around here. Want to hear about your story and then how you got into counseling and what really, who you want to talk to, counsel, and all that kind of thing.
Okay, that's a whole lot of questions.
It's a lot of
all at
questions.
once.
Let's start with who are you, Hayley?
Who am I? Okay.
Now, hold on. Before you get into that, Adrienne, you knew Hayley.
Poor Hayley.
I know, as a blog
I did.
famous person.
So she wrote for the Austin Moms blog. How long did you write for them?
I wrote for them for probably 4 years, kind of off and on.
Okay.
And then I stopped for a while, and then I realized I kind of missed it because I actually really love writing. If I had more time, that is something I would devote a whole lot of time to. But I don't have a whole lot of time.
Yeah.
And so I would kind of stop writing for Austin Mom's blog because I would realize I just don't have time to do this, but then I would miss it. And so I would kind of come back off and on. But
Okay.
when it was all said and done, probably about 4 years.
I'm not going to lie, I never actually read the Austin Moms blog, but...
It wasn't for you. You were not the audience.
Okay, I was not the audience. But
It was a great... Yeah, I did read it. I don't know. I think it was back when blogs were cool. You know, that was kind of...
Before podcasts.
Right.
Yeah, before Pastor Plek had a podcast.
I do kind of feel like blogs are maybe on their way out, or maybe they've been out for a while.
yeah,
They're
I
a
think
thing
so.
of the past a little bit. Yeah.
They are, but I think they're making a comeback.
Don't worry, Chris is working on a blog.
I am
Okay,
working on
I
a
don't want to
blog.
discourage you then.
Yeah, thank you.
You should do that.
I should. I might have to incorporate your help because
Yes.
of how
I could be a
gifted.
ghostwriter.
She
I could be
is
a
a gifted
ghostwriter
writer.
for
You don't need to be a ghost. You need to be a legit, let's leverage, okay? And so this is where
So, but what
Haley
got you
was
in?
gifted. She was funny. Her
she not
blogs
funny
were
anymore?
funny.
What
I'm
happened?
sure she's
She
still
was.
funny. I
Once
wouldn't
upon a
know.
time.
But they were witty. They were funny because their mom blogs are I wouldn't be someone that would want to read a mom blog. But then when you
give
saw
me what a
Haley's
typical
mom blog,
blog is. That's what I don't know.
it just sounds like a bad idea. It sounds like something that would be
Lame.
very lame and about being a mom. And Haley's were not. They were kind of like a bigger picture. They were funny. They were.
Well, what made her funny? What made you go?
There was a little edge.
Okay.
A little bit of an edge. She wasn't really afraid to say some of the things that some moms are afraid to admit about.
So
some of
she'd
the
be
challenges.
perfect our church.
Yes.
I never wanted to come at it from the angle of I'm an expert mom. Let me teach other moms because that wouldn't have been accurate at all. But also I just would not have, approach would have felt weird. So I think I was more people would always tell me I was very relatable because I was not trying to be an expert in the topic, but more just here's what I'm dealing with at my house and here's how I'm handling it. What are you guys doing? Kind of that. And so.
Oh,
it
nice.
was great. And then what was really cool personally for me is I had 3 friends, 2 that I actually knew that were similar. They weren't writers for Austin Mom's blog, but one wrote a book that I loved. And then one she had great posts. Anyway, they both turned super progressive Christianity-ish. Both have completely fallen off the bandwagon of their faith and of core truths and scripture. And so it was cool to me.
Deconstruction kind of a deal.
Yeah. And just a lot of political garbage that got tied into everything. And so what was cool to me is when you kind of stayed, I only knew this from random Facebook feed, but you stayed consistent in your, where your hope was, where your truth was, and even though things happened in life, that didn't take away from kind of the message that you had. Not I really knew you at all, but you can learn enough, I feel from these other people. I learned enough through Facebook to know kind of where they were landing. And so that was cool to me. I think it's hard to find somebody that 15 years ago was raw and real and a little edgy, but also funny, but also full of gospel truth, that then stayed with that as life got hard. So
it's the Jen Hat makers of the world fell off the planet.
Yes.
Who's the other?
as far as famous people go, I feel like she's the main one. But I just had a couple friends. I had tons of respect. They were gifted writers and they were funny and they were, and they.
I remember you talking about that and how you really enjoyed a blog, and I kind of would laugh with you or whatever, and then we'd move on. But it seemed like it impacted you in a positive way.
Oh, yeah. Because those were dark years. The early years of motherhood are dark. And for me, they were. I'm not a little kid mom. I don't thrive with high control. Like, there's just not.
Are you?
Right.
Where are you, Hayley? As a high control mom, low control mom, whatever happens, mom. Where are you at as far? Because you have
Three. I have 3 boys.
3 boys.
Yep. 14, 10, and 8.
14, 10, and 8.
Yes. And I don't know. Do you mean kind of like, am I like a helicopter type of mom? Is that what you're
Yeah. Well, like high control, I always kind of think there's high control in the early ages is awesome.
Right.
High control, high nurturing. What happens when you don't transition from high control, high nurturing to the more of a coaching and more, more, I don't want to say distant, but less control, more coaching.
Right.
Then your kid becomes like wounded as a, like devoured by the mom kind of thing. So where would, and I know.
And I guess Chris and I use the word high control to just, so we are both not in this
low
category.
control.
And so we like immensely struggled in those years where it was like, put your child, like the moms are like, sit down and put on your bib. I'm like, we could just like, we were not capable of caring about that.
Right.
And so that was like so hard for us because then we suffered the consequences of a kid that couldn't sit down and put their bib on. And so anyway,
and
it was
don't wear
hard.
shoes.
Right. Well, it's funny because as you were asking that question, I'm sitting here thinking like, I don't know, am I high control or am I not? What I was actually thinking before you even said that about your kid not having shoes on, I was thinking like, I don't know that I could answer that because I think in some categories I find myself being high control and then in other categories not. And so one not thing that I was thinking is like my kids are constantly running around barefoot all the time. Yeah. And I think other people think it's weird. Like I don't let them go into like a gas station or something barefoot, but maybe you do. That's fine if you do.
No, we don't on purpose.
I'm pretty good. Hey,
maybe
Austin,
on
have
accident.
ever let you go into a gas station without shoes? All right.
I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah, I'm sure
in
it's
my house
happened.
too. But I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm both. It just depends on the topic. And I'm always intrigued by just how, like, even within my close friend group, I'll have some friends that are, like, very, very strict and controlling in areas that I'm like, I don't even know why you would care about that at all. I don't care about that. But then there'll be, like, a different set of things where I care a lot, and they're looser. And so I just think it kind of depends on what we're talking about.
I know this, now I'm going into a different realm, but this is something I think is important. Friend group, because usually moms that have different parenting styles can't be friends.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I feel like early on it's a different. When they're older, it's different because your lifestyle isn't decided so much by your parenting style.
Right.
But in those early years, I think that can be kind of true. What do you think?
Yeah.
About being friends with moms who parent way different?
Yeah. I guess early. Let's start with early age, and then probably later on it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, I mean that's true because later on, like I'm sure as you could, maybe you're still in this life phase, you probably are, but when your kids are little, I remember. So when my kids were little, I was a stay-at-home mom. And pretty much all my friends at that time were stay-at-home moms too. We all had little kids. We were all like having babies all the time at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I feel like all of our day-to-day life back then was like we were together all the time.
Yes.
For play dates and like let's meet at this park on Tuesday and on Thursday let's all go to music
That is
hour
exactly
together.
how it was.
Yes.
That's for sure.
You went from Robinson Park to the Catherine Fleischer Park to what's the one on the with all the pecans on it? Anyway, on Anderson Mill? Anyway,
I
felt like there was like Park Central was like your life revolved around park. If I wanted to find you during the day, I'd go to a park with like 4 moms.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm entering out of that stage, and for the first time, I'm now able to engage relationally with parents who are like a little different, just because we don't have our kids with us necessarily.
Yeah.
And that was like, so with boys, I'm sure you could speak to this.
Yeah.
So I always was like, they're on top of each other all the time.
Yes.
It's like they're just in a dog pile all the time.
Nonstop. I mean,
So,
mine's
and
still
the spread
at
is
their age.
14, 10, 8. Is that what you said?
14, 10, 8. Yeah.
So and they're still in a dog pile.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well,
and
that's
I
what we
would
look
say
forward
like
to.
half the time in like a fun way, like a fun dog pile, and then for sure at least half the time or more where they're angry and throwing punches and
And so that was the case. I mean, that's been true for always with us. And we quickly like intervened with like certain boundaries, like you can't choke someone out,
Right.
You can't punch in the face,
yes.
But like also it's so funny.
Punch
our
in the shoulder was okay.
Second born was like really tiny. They were all small, but he was like a 5-pound infant, and so he would get run over a lot whenever we would. So we taught him like you need to just like punch these kids,
right, just smack in the face. Get
and
him
so
in the nose.
now his only source of like he'll just punch you right in the face
That's
if
just
you
his
kind of
go-to.
sort of irritated him. And so it's a problem, but what was happening in those years is we were like they did have a lot of physical engagement. So then if I hung out with a mom who had boys
Yeah.
and they operated on like we're not physical, we're only verbal. Well, that was a tough deal, because then sometimes it would be like, well, shoot, your kid just like said something hateful,
Oh my gosh, yes.
and mine just like
Decked
kicked
you.
them, and I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, that's kind of what happens when you say something hateful.
Yes. Well,
And I
yeah,
was ready
get
to
that.
move on. Like this is them kind of working it out, but it was like they were wanting me to punish
Yeah.
my child for kicking, and that was like,
That's where I
Yep.
think we have a low control of, like, usually when everyone comes in tattles, the strategy now is I just punish everybody. If you come
Yeah.
and tattle to me, then
Right.
everyone goes for a lap around. We have like a little 0.3 mile
Yeah.
lap that they have to run or walk
Okay.
or hold hands together, which is
Right.
the latest one.
Yeah.
You have to hold hands the
Yes.
entire time and you can't let go. That's fun. But that's sort of the punishment strategy, and everybody gets punished, and I'm not worried about it, and I send you off, and I'm not worried about getting into your feelings right now because I understand everybody was guilty at some.
Right. Everyone contributed to the problem in some way.
but there is a bit of like, just hit them.
Sure.
Like,
Well,
there's times
or
where
just deal with it. In
just
other
take
words,
it.
like
Right.
this is where, like, so for example, not that we need to be up. We have 10 puppies right now,
Yes.
and the strategy with them is you don't need to break them up when
Right.
they kind of work it out.
Right, they do.
And with, I don't say boys or dogs, but they kind of just worked out a lot of their stuff. And I think every now and then we have to train the older ones, especially, like, if you create hatred against you by the words that you're saying and it causes a visceral response, you're not stewarding the heart of your brother well, and you need to understand that you're more brain adept. Because early on, I think this is true with girls, they are all about words and they create boundaries with words, whereas with
Right.
boys, words mean they're
Right.
talking grunts
Yes. And all over each other.
and all
at
over
the
each other,
same
and so
time.
the
I don't know if that's
boundary
what
is
your
all
kids do.
physical.
Right.
At least that's what I've seen.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I mean, that's how we parented, but not all
Right.
people are doing
You're
that.
right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're probably, maybe that's just us and
Yeah.
our parenting
we
style.
did parent with physical more than verbal.
Yes.
So now I've had to go backwards and be like, hey, first try saying something.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
We had to backtrack a little bit on that.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I've been trying to teach my kids that even still, because their go-to, I mean, and they, like I said, they get in fights constantly,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll come to me, to tattle, and it's like I'll have, one on one side and one on the other, and they're each telling me, well, he did this, and then he said this, and
Right.
I'm like, why don't y'all talk to each other?
Yeah.
Right.
Why do I have to be did you tell him that, hey, that hurt my feelings when you did that, or hey, that got on my nerves? Like, did you even try to say that to him, or did you just instantly come? And it's always that they instantly come to me.
Right.
But I'm trying to get them to
So
stop
here
doing that.
now I'm about to get into, like, social commentary culture. Like, I feel like, and this, I don't know if this is true that you've seen this, because kids have become more insulated. Like, there has never been a time that I haven't known where Austin is, and it's not that I don't want to know, but like there was never a point. It's like, hey, I'm gonna go out and play, and he was somewhere I wasn't really sure, and I was just trusting he would come home.
Right.
And he would have to have had to work it out at some degree with other kids, even his brothers, at some point for them to go on a journey somewhere and then come back alive.
Right.
Like, I remember doing that. I remember having to have conflict, overcoming, building resiliency just through life, but in a world where child abduction is like a thing.
Yeah.
And we see, and rightfully so, like there's a real sense of there are child predators out there, and so we've got to be a little bit more careful with that. What is the right response, and how do you build up the now I'm about to give you, here's your counselor answer.
Okay.
How do you build up resiliency with children in those stages? And this, if you can give me a textbook answer or one from your own kids, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Solve our problems.
Yeah. I mean, I'll try to answer your question in just a second, but you are right. We were talking about this the other night at small group, because I've got a few friends in there who have kids that are driving already. Like my oldest is 14, so we're not dealing with driving yet, but they've got some that just started driving. And they were saying how, like with the Life 360 app, I guess, you can, once you have kids that are driving, you can obviously track their location, but you can also track exactly like how fast they're going. I think even, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think even like how hard they braked and like all these different things. And so one of the girls in the group was saying like, gosh, like this is becoming dangerous for me, or like, I guess unhealthy for me. Cause she's like, I just sit here and look at Life 360 constantly to see like how fast is he going. You can like tell if they're texting while they're driving, and you can even shut off their texting so that they can't do that. And in some ways that's, I guess, good. Like my parents didn't have that ability to track how fast I was going and to make sure I don't even think I had a phone to text with when I first started driving. So I guess in some ways it's good, but in others, so what we were talking about at small group is we were like, sometimes maybe it's just better to not know. Like,
Right.
are we driving ourselves crazy, tracking every single thing they're doing? And then if they are in fact speeding, what are we going to do? Like jump up from small group and go call them and,
Slow down
or follow
Well,
them where they're at.
man.
It can kind of drive you
Yeah.
crazy, but you're right. I mean, there are things like kidnapping and stuff that I think is different than it was a long time ago. And so I think there are some areas where maybe it's healthy to kind of have that tighter control, and then other areas where maybe we don't need it. And I think just learning to discern, is this a necessary control or not? Or even to discern, like, why do I feel like I need to control this? Is it really for their benefit, or do I have some kind of a control issue and that's why I have to control this thing?
Yeah.
I don't know if that
Or
answers
like,
your
do I have
question
a
at all.
perceived sense of security in knowing? As like, I think I feel like that always irritates me. People
Yeah.
that feel like knowing makes it safer.
Right.
I'm like, man.
Right.
Well, I think what you're stealing, and again, I think that I don't want to be like, I'm not quite free range parenting, but I do think that when you instill trust in a kid by I trust you, and they're able to make mistakes without they take a risk, they make it, then there's confidence that's built, even if it was dumb.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I can actually do life. Because why are kids not moving out? I think,
Right.
Because isn't this I don't want to call it like an epidemic, but children are living at home till they're 30 because
Right.
they've been parented
Yeah.
to live at home until they're 30.
And like not getting driver's license.
That is okay. I thought that was
is a thing,
crazy. I
too.
thought
Yeah.
maybe I was like, oh, maybe our neighbor's just the one person. No, but that is because we have a neighbor that's 16 or now 18, and she just got a driver's license.
Yeah.
But that's not normal. That is normal
It's
for kids to
normal now,
wait because
yeah. I don't know. I think all sorts of reasons. I mean, I think more and more I've heard that kids don't care to have their driver's license. Like they're happy for their parents to drive them around or to bum a ride with a friend. So I think that's I would bet that's most of it. I think there are some parents maybe that don't feel like their kid's ready to drive yet. I don't know. But I was going to backtrack for a second, and I don't know if I kind of forget what your original question even was.
Listen,
but something
we're
that you
free
said or
flowing, yeah.
asked triggered this thought for me. So my oldest son is 14,
Yep.
and he accepted Christ when he was like 7.
Sure.
I never saw really like a whole lot of again, he's 7,
Right.
so there is that, but I never saw like a ton of life change happen. Like he was a Christian. I know that he actually understood what it meant to ask Jesus into your heart. Like I know he did, but
Was it a backyard Bible club experience?
no, it was just at home.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, just at home. So, then he gets to middle school, and not that he was not a bad kid. He wasn't getting into any kind of crazy trouble like drugs and drinking or anything crazy like that. But I definitely, as he went from like 6th to 7th and then the end of 7th, he was starting to kind of like the people he was hanging around with. I just could see some changes in him. And I definitely didn't see anything like Jesus in him, really. He was just kind of going the same way that all of his non-Christian friends were going and like listening to the same kind of music. For a while, we had this rule where, he was super into rap music. So we would let him listen to rap music, but it had to be like a quote unquote clean and edited version. That was maybe, I would actually say that's maybe the biggest parenting mistake I think I've made thus far. Like, even the clean and edited, this is like a total side note, but even
this is
clean and
super,
edited.
I'm like taking notes.
Clean and edited rap music is still really dirty. If you're actually, the
Yeah.
message is still there. Maybe
Yes.
the like F word is beeped
Right.
out or
You need
whatever.
to tell Adrienne what she's listening to then.
Well, actually, honestly, same. So I
I
could
am
talk
not
about
listening to
inventive
rap, okay? I'm listening to pop.
Taylor Swift.
Oh.
Pop.
I am not listening to God-honoring music most
Yeah,
of the time.
okay.
I will confess
Same.
that.
Honestly,
Yeah.
the same.
That's we call that mommy's music. All right.
Well, it's very true, and like complete solidarity with you on that. But he was listening to some stuff and I was letting it because I'm like, well, I'm making sure it's edited. And anyway, he went last year. He had like I keep calling it a life-changing summer. He went to boot camp.
Yeah.
And did like Backyard
yeah.
Bible Club. And then he also went to like a different church camp with Austin Ridge Church.
Yeah.
And the whole summer was transformative for him. I mean, for sure, his walk with Jesus like took root and became real over the summer. And so he came back at the end of the summer and he on his own decided like, I'm not listening to any of that anymore. Like it's not good. It's doing things to my brain. It almost made me feel bad about myself because I'm like, gosh, he shouldn't have, like I should have told him that instead of him arriving at that decision for himself. But I was proud that he did. So he comes back from the summer and he's decided like no more. In fact, he decided he will only listen to Christian music, which I didn't give him that rule, but he decided.
Do you think that
Christian
might be
music
actually
only.
a good thing? I don't want to say like, I'm not going to go like, hey, encourage your kids to listen to hardcore rap.
Right.
But do you think it was good that because there wasn't a rule from you,
Yeah.
it became a peer pressured whatever thing?
Yes, I definitely
Or
think
God,
so.
Holy Spirit thing.
Yeah, I think so. Now, I will say with my younger two, like now that we're removed from that kind of rap music world, I'm like, okay, I will not, my younger two will not be permitted to listen to that. Whether they decide that or
Right.
not, I'm deciding that on their behalf.
Nice.
But yes, with my oldest, the way it happened, I do think maybe it was better that he arrived at that decision for himself.
Yeah.
But so he decided that he's getting super plugged into youth group and he's not going to miss a week of youth group. He kind of made all these really great decisions. And at first I found myself being kind of like, oh, this is like too good to be true. Like it's almost like, it's just like a church camp high.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
after a few weeks, he's going to be like, whatever.
Church merch.
But he has maintained like all of those decisions from, June through currently. But I'm getting to my point. Last week, for the first time in however many months that is, 8 months, he didn't want to go to youth group a few weeks ago. And also he's got a Bark phone. And so I'm able to track like everything he's listening to, everything he's texting, like everything. Well, for the first time in like 8 or 9 months, a rap song popped up, which I hadn't seen that. That hadn't even been an issue for like 9 months now. And I instantly felt like almost like fear. I mean, this is not a huge deal to skip youth group 1 week out of 9 months.
Yep.
This isn't, cause for alarm necessarily. And one rap song. But I felt like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? Does this mean he's like backtracking from this decision? Does this mean he's like falling off? Is he getting with a bad crowd? And so I decided, okay, the second he gets home from school, like I'm going to confront him about why did you want to skip youth group and you listen to a rap song all in the same week? Like, what does this mean? And so I'm like washing dishes and like waiting for him to get home. And I'm praying as I'm doing it. And I'm asking God, like, okay, I don't want to be like psycho mom that goes crazy on him over this small offense, but I felt really unsettled. And so I felt God, so I asked God, I said, in your infinite wisdom, is it okay to approach him about this? How should my approach be? And I felt very like, almost like God, like audibly saying, approach him only if it is not out of a place of fear.
Nice.
Like if you feel like you're coming to him about this as a, hey, I love you. And you're, a brother in Christ. And like, let's talk about what was prompted this decision to listen to this music. That's one thing. But if it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so fearful about what this means, your fear is going to be off-putting to him. And so I decided, okay, well, in this moment, it's coming from a place of fear and insecurity. So, okay, God, I will obey and I won't go this, I'll wait for your Holy Spirit to convict him versus me. And then he walked in the door from school and I instantly was like, hey, why are you listening to rap music again? So I completely disobeyed. And like I feared, it was off-putting to him. And he was like, this is,
Whoa,
very
Mom.
overblown. And, but my whole point in saying that is I do think with your original question, 20 minutes ago now, I think that this kind of issue of control versus not control, I don't know that there's like a set formula for it. I think it is got to be God-driven, kind of the way that you're controlling and what you're controlling. I think it's different from kid to kid. And I think like where it's coming from inside of you, like what the reason for it is.
I like
all
what
of
you
those
said
things
about
matter.
fear. And Adrienne, I wanted you to touch on that because I think you and I have had a conversation about parenting from fear talk.
We talked about that last.
Was that last? Was it on podcast? Well, shoot, talk about it again because I want to bring Hayley into that conversation.
Yeah, I also want to hear some of Hayley's like background because we don't know that yet, but we can come back to that, I guess. I do feel like what we talked about a couple weeks ago is all of our kids are probably going to walk away with like issues from our parenting. Like there's going to be things. I mean, we're broken people. We have ways of coping, ways of leading that are from a place of brokenness. So that's going to affect them negatively. They're going to have to work that out. But what I think when I look back at times when I feel like a message got really screwed up is when there was like fear driving the instruction or fear driving the correction. And when I think about my own parenting, like exactly exactly what you described, I feel like is when to pay attention. Because to me, the difference between coming to your son because you love them and you don't want this rap music to like bring them down in a way that is like you're coming fully with like a heart of love for them and a love for God and a wisdom, like that is a very different motive than coming to them from like, I'm so scared because basically I don't trust God is sovereign over this.
Right.
I don't trust that I have a lack of faith in a lot of things. So I'm going to come and attack you for something that makes me scared. I think the same action motivated from a place of fear versus a place of like
faith.
love. I think that to me is, I mean, I obviously have a long way to go in parenting, but that to me seems to be a consistent red flag to like pay attention to and like look at when you see a child who launches at 18 and just rebels. My guess is they were parented with a whole lot of like fear. Mm-hmm. And when I even come to like, I think it's true when they're 2 years old. Like when you let your kids go barefoot, there's a bit of like, well,
I might step on something.
Right. Austin had 11 stitches in the arch of his foot from running around barefoot and running. And I'm like, and that's something that like, I'm not afraid of that happening again. If it happens again, we're going to deal with it again. And,
right.
But also I would like to hope that my son's learned something about wearing some shoes. And I'm like, I'm going to not let him go into a gas station for the love of God. Like, we're going to obey laws.
That happened when he was with dad, not with mom, apparently.
But I do feel like there's a point at which, like, even when it comes down to like our safety of our kids, it's like I have a real hard time. I am not an anxious person, but when it comes to the sidewalk and scooters, I am like, I can't do it. I can't go on a walk with my kids where they're on scooters and we're on a sidewalk on a busy road. Like I'm just way too.
I'm the same way.
I'm too nervous.
Yes, that's. Like, I guess that is one thing where I am like helicopterish.
Yes.
But
so I just don't do it. I'm like, we're just not going on a walk. Like, we go to a trail because I can't. I get so panicky even during trick or treating. Mm-hmm. I'm like, my 4-year-old will be run over tonight because he darts
will be the
out
worst Halloween ever.
And so, but I'm like anything else. I'm like, oh, they can climb that or do that or run that. And so I think there's certain things where I'm like,
it's wild. Like at the playground, they're like, doing backflips off the top, and you're like, that's fine.
That's
like,
funny. I'm the exact same way.
Yes.
The like traffic and cars is a huge.
And I think
is that because it's uncontrollable?
I think it is. I feel like
it's like a false sense of control at the playground because that's for kids.
No, but it's not. Here's why I don't think it's a false sense. Okay. If your child, I really believe, if they can climb up that high, they'll probably have the skills to climb down.
Right. Okay, fair enough. And
if you backflip off something and break your arm, you probably need to learn that. And so I'm kind of like, I'm okay with that. But a car, trusting that people are paying attention and seeing, to me, there's a whole
another dynamic.
Level dynamic. And so what I do is because I am unable to engage that without parenting from a place of total fear and anxiety, that I'm like, I just can't really do that.
I think one of the places that we've grown is like, for example, at the soccer fields, the playground is like kind of disconnected from the soccer fields, but there's no traffic in between.
Right.
And so like, hey, go play on the playground, go figure it out. It's kind of
and I care a lot about, like, I'm like, you've got my kids are all they're just not very extroverted. They're not super confident in leaving me. So for me, it's almost a discipline issue. Like if you're going to sit here and whine at me, that's a problem. Like we're going to get disciplined for that. So I'm wanting you to go separate and go work out your problems on the playground and like, get with other kids and have conflict. So I think that there is a point where like, you need to parenting from a place of like boundaries and wisdom without being motivated by fear, I think is such a big deal. And I think it's subtle. And I think even when it comes to like letting your daughter go to like some middle school dance, I'm like, I think you can choose to not let them go or let them go. And either decision I think can be the wrong one if it's from a place motivated by fear. Yeah. I really do think that is like.
So I think one of the things that I'm hearing and I felt like is parents taking their the role of authority in the home is important. Mm-hmm. Whatever the authority is. Yeah. When you're in charge, you know it. When the Army we used to say, when in charge, be in charge. And so when you're in charge and you're authority, be confident in the decisions that you're making and don't vacillate because that creates insecurity within your child. Yeah. And that makes them feel like things are unsafe. And whereas if you confidently tell them yes or confidently tell them no, they will learn to deal with it.
Right.
And that builds resiliency and trust for authority and all the things that we probably need to instill in them. But I think what the culture tells us, hey, whatever your child's feeling, you need to empower that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I did. I don't know if you were going to talk about the podcast that you had listened to that you sent me, and I listened to that a couple days ago.
It was a podcast by Jordan Peterson on basically this issue of parents like giving up authority.
Right.
Say like, oh, counselors are the authority, or somebody else other than me is the best person to raise my child.
Right. Yeah, now my head is full of so many different thoughts because I was going to respond to something you said a minute ago, but I also want to talk about that really quick, I guess.
Yeah.
Some stuff that you were saying. I agree with everything that you said. And I think it's also like back to my story with my oldest with like the rap song and me confronting him. I think sometimes you have to, like, it's like a thin line or a thin line because you are the parent and therefore you are like God put you as their parent for a reason to teach them and instruct them and have some rules and boundaries. And so I know you can't be lax on that.
Right.
At the same time, like with the situation with my oldest, I was thinking, okay, I'm not really giving any room at all for the Holy Spirit to convict him. Like maybe who knows if I were to have waited a day or two, if he would have been like, Mom, I ended up listening to a rap song and I'm feeling like I shouldn't have done that. Or like maybe the Holy Spirit could have convicted him versus me being like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
And there's many other times where that comes up where it's like, you've got to like kind of let them fall or risk it a little bit. And because if their walk with Jesus is real, then he's going to convict them. And you want that to happen.
But how do you repair, like, oh, you've screwed that up. You want to make it right. How, as a parent, do you now repair, like, oh, I jumped on you when I
just told him that I did that. I mean, I don't know if there would have been a better way to repair it, but after probably an hour, I was like, dude, I overreacted. I'm sorry. Like, you're right. It's not a huge deal that you missed youth group 1 week out of 9 months. And, we're not going to go back to listening to the music that you used to listen to, but at the same time, one song in 9 months, like I think my reaction was overboard, and I'm sorry.
And how did he respond?
He's great. He's very much like a mama's boy kind of kid, and so he was very sweet about it. But I don't know if you would have been years ago in Grace Path when Cindy Hawks used to lead it. She had I forget how she worded it, but something that she would talk about where it's not so much I'm going to get it wrong how she said it, but it's not so much like how you react to something, but it's like how quickly do you make it right or recover from it, basically. Your turnaround time. That's what it was. What is your turnaround time like?
Adrienne did a whole women's treat on that.
I took a whole thing off of her on that. And your turnaround time is everything. Because we're going to screw it up. Like, we're going to mess it up. And so the turnaround, how quickly you turn around, I think is
what matters.
Everything.
But I have laughed over the years because I'm like, I bet my kids think I am like bipolar or something because my turnaround time is actually really great. Like I think I have a great, but it's so quick that I think sometimes they're like, whoa, what just happened? You were just. So I am really good about going back and saying like, gosh, I'm sorry. Like that was not the right.
It's huge.
So I'm good at that, I would say. But.
And to me, that shows relational repair. To me, that's what our kids need to see in their marriage someday and their dating relationships. Like this whole, like even if you waited 2 days when you kind of were feeling it 30 minutes later, I'm like, don't wait 2 days. There's like for them to learn that like we actually can. Honestly, I really do think that some of that apology is a decision, and you can just choose to make a decision really quickly.
Right. Yeah.
And it's good for them to see that it doesn't have to be this long, drawn out thing. So did you have more to respond back on what Chris was saying? I want to hear a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to move to that. Yeah.
Oh, were you ready to move?
Yep.
Do you want to ask?
No, I was thought
I can like submit.
I would love for you to ask.
Pretty good at submission.
You are so submissive. You're so great.
So sweet.
Yeah, sweet and submissive. That's right.
And meek.
Very meek.
Learns in quiet submission. That's pretty much who Adrienne Plek and Adrienne is.
Oh. Anyway, I am curious, like, did you grow up here? I don't know this kind of background on you.
Yeah.
So where you grew up, where you went to high school, college, and then like when y'all got your whole story of marriage and kids, I'm just like, I would love to hear that.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
Okay. So I born in Houston, moved to Florida when I was like 2 years old and lived there until I was 10. Okay. And then my family moved to Austin. And then pretty much have been in Austin ever since, except I went to A&M. So I went to A&M I was in College Station for 4 years, got married right out of college, and my husband got a job in Dallas. So we lived in Dallas for a year, but then back in Austin, Cedar Park area ever since.
Where'd you go to high school?
Leander.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been around in the same area for a very long time. So Leander High School.
Did y'all go to church when you were in high school?
Yeah. So my family went to Shoreline.
Oh. Yes.
Shoreline Christian Center.
It's right around here.
Yeah.
And then my now ex-husband, but his family grew up at Hill Country.
Okay.
So, like he'd gone there. Like his family, I think was going to it when it met like at the Dairy Queen,
Yes.
or like with the Dairy Queen parking lot. I mean, across the street from where it's like in that shopping center.
Yep. Now Arise Ministries is there.
Yeah. So they were there from the very beginning. And so after he and I got married, we went there because that's just what, he was kind of used to. And so we did that. And then probably, I don't remember, maybe a year or two into our marriage, we were like, it might be kind of refreshing to go somewhere different than where your family has gone for your whole life. And so we actually helped start the Hill Country UT church plant with Denny Henderson. And
we know
that
Denny.
was a great experience. But after like a year or so of that, we weren't having kids yet, but we knew we were going to start thinking about having kids. And that church plant kind of just felt like a college ministry and not so much a family type of thing. And so we left there, and then we were part of the Round Rock church plant.
Who was the pastor of that one?
Of Round Rock, Keith Ferguson.
Oh, Keith was...
Yeah.
So City View, or became City View.
Right.
Whenever remember when everyone was Hill Country and it
I
was
know, for a while it was
confusing?
like Hill Country Round Rock, Hill Country Pflugerville, but now all the churches have their own names.
Yep.
But yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that Keith was... I didn't... So that's when they were at the YMCA?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I knew Keith was at the YMCA. I didn't know that was called Hill Country Round Rock. That's cool. Okay.
Yes. That shows, I guess, again, how old I am. That was
No,
a long time
whatever,
ago.
you're
That's
not old.
07. Like,
That's
she's
like
OG.
Old school Hill Country stuff. But then we eventually made our way back to Hill Country Lakeline or whatever we're calling that.
Austin now.
Austin. Okay. Yeah.
I call it Lakeline.
Lakeline, whatever it is.
Northwest.
Yes. And so, trying to think of what else. So yeah, after graduating from A&M, before we had kids, I worked in a sales role for a couple of years. Then I got a job that I actually really loved, working in the admissions department at Concordia University.
fun.
I loved that job. I hadn't really loved the sales stuff. I just did it. But the Concordia job, I really loved that. And then we'd been trying to get pregnant, get this job at Concordia, like without success. Then I get this job at Concordia that I'm like, okay, I love this. Maybe it's good that we're not having kids yet because like I kind of want to stay here and keep doing this. And then I got pregnant very quickly once I started that job and had intended to continue working even once we had our baby. But once he came, I just couldn't leave him, which I know is a pretty common thing I think that happens with moms. So then I stayed home for the next 12 years with kids because we had him and then we had, 2 more. And so I stayed home for the next 10 or 12 years. Right after graduating from A&M, I had considered going to grad school to be a counselor because that's what I've actually always wanted to do. I don't know why I didn't. It was one of those things. I think it was like, well, I'm done with school. Do I really want to jump right back into school? I kind of didn't. Me and my husband wanted to do some traveling. We didn't have kids yet, so it was a good time to do that. So I just didn't do it. And then, ended up staying home with kids for the next decade. But then, 6 years ago now, got a divorce. Not my desire. But that's what happened. And so it was kind of time to figure out, okay, what is life going to look like now? Like, I'm not sure that stay-at-home mom gig is going to keep working in this new chapter of life. And so when trying to figure out what life was going to look like, it was easy to, like, counseling again was something I'd always wanted to do. So that was a pretty easy decision. I didn't want to just get a job that I was going to, like, just a job that I wasn't going to like. And so, went back to school at Liberty University. And I'm almost done, finally, getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling.
And the question we asked, remember I asked you this earlier, is it called like an LPC intern or LPC associate? Is the official term associate?
It's associate. I think those terms are used interchangeably.
Okay.
And so different people,
people got really
places.
offended when I said intern, and so I learned not to say that anymore.
Yeah,
so
I would not get offended because when we met that one time, I'm like, I don't actually know either. So I don't care if you call me an intern, but I think they're kind of used interchangeably.
All right. So I love the fact that you've got a teenager, and so therefore counseling teenagers, is that something that you are into, want to do, love doing?
Yeah, it's funny because I only just started. I'd only reached the internship portion of my schooling in January, and this is March. So it's only been a couple of months, but I already have quite a few regular clients I'm seeing, and most of them are teenagers.
Oh, wow.
That has been kind of the main. I've got 3, actual adults, non-teenagers that are regular clients, and then I've got quite a few teenagers, which is not something I necessarily ever said that, I specialize in teenagers. It just has kind of happened that way. But I'm really liking that, actually. I like that category of client.
It's a great, I taught high school for a season, and I think it's I also think if you can capture a teenager at like 17, I think you changed that trajectory like pretty firm. So
for sure.
That's really, really cool. I love that. Okay, so this is where I'm curious. So I just blanked on what I was going to ask you.
You're so curious,
tell
but
me,
you can't remember.
You said you majored in business. Is that what you said?
Communications.
Communications at A&M. What, can I ask when you graduated A&M?
Yeah, 03. Well,
Okay.
I was class of 03. I graduated in 04, actually.
Okay.
I have, I had and have scoliosis.
Oh,
like a crooked back.
Yeah.
And my, let's see, I guess it would have been my sophomore year of college. I had surgery.
Oh gosh.
Which took place like over Christmas break. And so the recovery time should have been like Christmas break should have been sufficient to have the surgery and recovery and then go back, when the spring semester started. But I got a staph infection from the surgery and it was actually really, really awful. And so I had to sit out a whole semester because I had to, it was actually a huge ordeal. But because of that, ended up being 04 instead of 03.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember. Okay. I was curious about that. Here's my other thing. So I remember seeing some of the stuff about your sister. I'm not sure how much of that story that you can share.
Yeah,
but
she's very comfortable with me talking about that, so I can share
I would love to hear, because I was following you on Facebook through maybe her initial, like a successful recovery, maybe the first like successful kind of recovery. And I almost feel like you wrote a blog about it that I read. And at the time, I mean, our church has always kind of reached a demographic of people where we always do have at least a couple like in the process of recovering addicts. And so I've become more familiar, and I enjoy these people a lot. They're some of my favorite individuals at the church.
Why is that?
They're just so
real.
They're real. They're all the things like there's an authenticity, and I think there's also something really cool that I find in someone that's like reached a rock bottom. It's like they see all of life through a perspective that I think is so life-giving.
It's so true. And I feel like they're typically a lot more, maybe it's what you're saying, but more compassionate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of the most, like my sister is actually very, very compassionate.
Yes.
And other people that I know that have kind of gone through some similar stuff as her, it definitely breeds like when you've been at rock bottom and in a lot of ways, my sister was a hated person. Like being an addict makes you an awful person. It's a disease. But she was an awful person for a lot of years and therefore was looked at as an awful person. And so I think it's given her compassion now for other quote unquote awful people.
Right.
And maybe it's he who's been forgiven much loves much.
Yeah, exactly.
I
That's
love
a more
that.
eloquent way of saying what we're trying to say. Yes.
And I also think they have a freedom. Like they have a freedom in who they are that is so attractive to me. It's like who they are today. They're just free to be whatever that is.
Were you thinking about something specific with her sister, like her journey?
Yeah, so I was curious if you would share with us a little bit, because I feel like that my guess is you would have a lot of insight in counseling somebody through a similar struggle.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and we do have a lot of people that would probably.
Yeah,
benefit.
I think I would have insight for sure into counseling an addict themselves, but I also think I have a lot of insight on, a lot of people don't realize that when there's an addict, like the family is very much affected too. Maybe not to the same extent or in the same way as the addict themselves, but my parents could have and should have benefited greatly from counseling. They didn't really seek that out, and they should have. It would have been very helpful.
For being a family member of an addict.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much hurt involved with being a family member of an addict. There is enabling behaviors that you can fall into. There's all kinds of things, but yes. So my sister, she is 6 years younger than me. Ironically, she has scoliosis too. And so she had back surgery also.
Wow.
What makes it ironic is that mine is called congenital scoliosis, meaning I was born with it.
Right.
Hers is idiopathic, meaning she just like developed it. And so it's strange that we both have it, but not
The same.
Yeah. But anyway, she had back surgery also. I was already in college when she had hers. And she got addicted to her prescription pain medicine after her surgery. And so that is what initiated her addiction. And that was when she was about 16. I don't think that addiction with teenagers and like pain medicine was as prevalent back then as it is now. Because I think now most parents are pretty hyper sensitive to that kind of a thing. My mom, and it's not her fault. Like, again, I don't think it was as much of a thing back then, but my mom was not hyper, aware of that. And so my mom noticed that, my sister seemed to need the pain medication longer than like what I had needed, but it didn't arouse her suspicion necessarily. And so my sister stayed on pain medicine longer than she should have, developed an addiction. Throughout high school, I think it was just, not just, but, it was just the pain pills. But eventually, as with any addiction, that no longer does the trick. And so then she had to go after something more. And so she eventually became a very, very, very hardcore heroin addict, like an IV. She literally blew out every vein pretty much in her body.
Is she alive still?
She is.
I mean, that's a miracle in
very
itself.
long journey. I mean, she was homeless in Colorado for some number of years. She was in jail a lot. Honestly, my family would feel relieved when she was in jail because we were like, okay, she's safe. She's not doing drugs. She's fed. She's not sleeping, in the cold. So it was actually like a good thing for a while when she was in jail. She would kind of go through bouts of sobriety. I think for a long time, maybe the longest that she ever maintained was like 2 or 3 months. And then she would like fall back into it. And then she ended up, she met a guy in rehab. And that was another thing. She was in and out of rehab all the time. I mean, she's been in so many rehabs. I think she actually ran out of rehabs to go to because she'd been in so many. She met a guy in one of the rehabs, ended up getting married. She got pregnant with her son, and she did manage to stay sober for the majority of her pregnancy. She had him, and it's kind of a long story, but CPS got involved. My parents ended up raising him for the first year that he was alive, because if they didn't, CPS would have taken him. And so then she got serious, and she went to a live-in, I think it was like a year-long rehab program here in Austin. And so she was there for like 8 months without her son. My parents had her son. And then for the last 3 or 4 months that she was there, she got to bring her son to go live with her. And that was it. She has been sober ever since. So her son is almost 6. She's maintained sobriety now for, 5 years essentially, which is for sure the longest stretch by far. And she did not finish her undergrad. So she's actually in school right now getting her undergrad in, I forget the exact name for it, but basically addictions counseling.
Wow,
cool.
good for her.
Yeah.
Oh, that's powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's clearly where like counseling is needed.
Yes.
And a blessing. And one of the things I sent you was the interview with Jordan Peterson and Abigail Schreier. Like, there's times when parents send their kids to counseling because they don't know. I think they've abdicated their role as a parent.
Yeah.
Talk to me maybe how you like. And this, I know you're just starting off, so I don't expect you to have all the answers.
Right.
But maybe this is the part where maybe you've seen it just socially.
Yeah.
And then just how have we seen our culture sort of shift towards like outsourcing authority to other people for our own children, and then how I think there's almost a harm when a lot, not you of course, but a lot of counselors aren't Christ-centered. I mean, that's not even like, you're at Liberty University where you're learning how to integrate Jesus into stuff, but where a lot of counselors aren't doing that, and they're kind of like, follow your feelings, follow your heart, you're going to self-actualize.
Yeah.
And it actually creates this negative, like so much navel gazing that you become almost narcissistic. You almost give your kid an NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, because there's so much looking at themselves.
It's true. I feel like I need like a whole hour to even. Well, for real though, because that podcast.
This is what's going to be. We're going to we'll end in about 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll bring you back.
Okay.
And then that'll be like the cliffhanger that people will come back
Yeah,
for.
because there's actually a lot to be said about that podcast that you sent.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure more than the 5 minutes. But I actually listened to the podcast, and then I called a friend of mine and made her listen to it, because I'm like, what do you think about this? Because I would say 60 to 70% of it I agreed with and was even like convicted by, because there were some things I'm like, gosh, I could be doing better at this. So I, for sure, the bulk of it I jived with and agreed with. Yeah. There was a small percentage where I'm like, I don't know if I agree with this, because, and I think I do. I think maybe it was just the way they were wording some things.
And it wasn't Christian.
No, I know it wasn't Christian. But like, I almost like they undermined a little bit the importance of, like, I think about my sister, for example, going back to her with her addiction. I think that she had, in fact, I know now that she had some very underlying things going on inside of her from a young age. So she struggles greatly with anxiety, and she struggles with depression, and she's recently been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was super insecure. Like, she was really, really tiny for her age, and got picked on for that, and it just bred insecurity in her. And so she had all of these things going on as a little or younger girl. And so I think that when she gets this pain medication, and it has kind of, this calming or euphoric, whatever effect, I think that in a lot of ways she self-medicated. Like
Right.
she had felt so
Right.
just distressed and torn up on the inside for so many years. And then she takes this and it's like, And I feel like if some of those internal emotional things had been addressed, maybe she wouldn't have turned to that as a coping mechanism. And so in some ways, I felt like in that podcast, they almost were undermining the importance of what are the underlying like feelings happening, or what are the underlying things happening inside. Like, I think that's important. And so that was the small portion that I kind of was like, I don't know if I agree with these people, but the vast majority of what they said, I think is true. Like, I do think people, and honestly me sometimes, weigh too heavily on your kids' feelings and like treat them like little, I don't know,
victims,
like lilies or whatever. They're like
you're not, you
little
can't
flower.
do it. I have to protect you.
Yeah. Right. And I think that sometimes, not to stereotype, I think sometimes that's harder for moms than for dads. Moms tend to have a bit more of like a nurturing and soft side, whereas I think it's a little bit easier for a dad to be like, you're fine, go do what I told you to do. And we're not gonna make excuses for it. And so I agree with so much of it.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've sort of seen, like, because they're super conservative, which so this is what I've been saying for a long time. The conservative movement without Christ is growing, meaning, and for the longest time, the conservatives have been Christians. We're like the one, we're it, and everybody else over there is the bad guys. Then all of a sudden, we are right. Everyone's like, oh, those Christians are not. I mean, they might believe a crazy thing about Jesus being raised from the dead, but look at how awesome they are.
Right.
And of course, the left has been pushing. They're just so angry. So a lot of non-Christians are jumping over to the conservative bandwagon without Christ. And you might be doing a lot of right things, but with the wrong reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem ultimately when you don't have a Christ-centered viewpoint, which is why I love Ben Shapiro and those guys, but he doesn't know Jesus.
Right.
Jordan Peterson, Christian-esque.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the problem that I'm finding with a lot of conservative people that don't have Christ. We say the same things, and so what you're going to find is like you're probably going to have a lot of conservatives kind of bash counseling again.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be the non-Christ-centered stuff is still wrong, and so all of a sudden we're going to be on the lefties over here. They're crazy liberal, and we haven't moved.
Right.
And so as one who has been the only conservative person, as people march over the conservative side, as you know, it's cool now. It's cool to be conservative. We're going against the grain, how awesome we are. We're going to find ourselves on the liberal side of things and like addressing things like emotions. Everyone's going to be like, you need to be stoic. Stoic's the way to go.
Right.
And every super conservative person, like they kind of lift up stoicism as like the ultimate in philosophy.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're going to be against all those hedonists, blah, blah.
Right.
And
We
I'm
just
just
talked
like,
about
man, your
stoicism in our small group
feelings
last night.
aren't evil.
Right.
They are a great sense of understanding where the darkness of your own heart is, but your solution isn't like steeling yourself against reality. It's embracing Christ. And I think that is, as I'm watching the culture, sway back and forth, and it's happening so fast, or at least it feels like it's happening so fast because now I'm older, and so look at those whippersnappers. But I feel like that's what I'm watching happen is the conservative movement is going past the far right, and I'm not there. I feel like I'm sitting right here.
Right.
I haven't moved.
Yeah.
I agree, and I really do think that there has to be a middle ground between acknowledging past and healing and feelings, but also not being driven by them.
Right.
Right.
I mean, because I think what Jordan Peterson was saying, like the absolute nuttiness of the transgender stuff has created everyone going like, I cannot identify with that crazy. I'm jumping on the conservative bandwagon, but we don't have Christ over here.
Yeah.
It creates a new problem.
Right. Well, I think two things, and I know we have to wrap up, I guess, but so maybe we can...
This is your wrap up, and then we're going to cliffhanger.
I was going to say, I think it could be a good cliffhanger because two thoughts that came to my mind while you were talking and then while you were talking. One, and again, alluding back to like Cindy Hawkes of the Grace Path days, she used to always talk so much about the fact versus, or truth and feeling, like choo-choo train illustration, where, like what's supposed to be, and I'm going to get all the parts of the train
it's
wrong.
The faith,
like the
fact,
engine,
feelings, right? No, fact. Fact is the resurrection, faith, and then the feelings of the last one. Yeah.
Right.
But she had she did have a train. I remember.
She had a train.
They're stealing the Your Life in Christ thing from Crew.
Maybe.
Which is,
well, it was some kind of a
feeling.
train, and the point was like, what should be driving the train is truth.
Yes.
God's truth.
Yeah.
And then not that you eliminate your feelings, but your feelings can follow with what is true, but how you can get yourself in a really bad situation when what is driving everything is your feelings. And then truth is just kind of like, and so I think that's a huge thing to kind of Jordan Peterson's podcast is I think that is what he was saying without saying is that nowadays kids and parents and everyone is just being like,
feelings leads the way.
It's just so everything. I feel this way, and oh my gosh, they feel this way. Versus like, where's the truth?
Right.
So I think that's a huge thing. And then to answer, you were asking kind of like, why do I think that nowadays people are kind of just like abdicating their authority and like letting like counselor handle this or let the teacher. I don't know exactly why, because you're right, I'm not an expert yet. I'm new at all this, but I do think one thing is just like the information overload, right? Yeah. So I feel like when I had like a newborn, for example, and I'm trying to decide like what's our parenting philosophy? Are we like attachment style parents? Are we like, what are we? Vaccinate, like all the things. Well, there are far more than like what our parents and our grandparents had. There are a million resources online, on social media, on podcasts, on everything. And you can find just as many people arguing that this parenting style is right and here's all the research why, but you can also find just as much research on the other side of things. And I feel like it becomes overwhelming for a parent to be like, I don't know which way we're going. Let's just let someone else figure that out. And so I think that's what happens. I think nowadays parents are like, there's too much information. I don't know how to sort through it all. So I'm going to let someone else sort through it all because it just feels like too much. But again, it boils down to like truth. And truth is getting lost in so many other things. Well,
Hayley, I love every aspect of that, and we're going to leave everybody like this.
Okay.
They're on that we're going to solve all those things next podcast, all right? So we're bringing you back.
Okay.
And so, Adrienne, you going to come back for that one?
We'll see.
All right, yeah, maybe. All right, so we're definitely bringing Hayley back. Hey, if you got any questions specifically for Hayley and you want to talk counseling or like anywhere with the direction of counseling, conservatism, and mixed with Christianity, any of that stuff you want to talk, or you just want to talk more about Hayley's life, we're all about that. Just text us in at 737-231-0605. We'd love to hear from you.
I feel like you should say that number slower. That was very fast.
737-231-0605, or just go to pastorplek.com, drop a line there. We would love to hear from you. This is like our favorite thing, interacting with your questions. And so we're bringing Hayley back, so you can be confident of that. So tune in. So from our house to yours, have an awesome week.